it's me again. I'm here.
Hi, Eowyn.
I'm everywhere. What can I say? That's what happens when you're an elf. So this is a panel for us to be able to talk about DNA and adoption. It's something that's close to my heart because I'm adopted and I'm also a birth mother, and I found half of my biological family through DNA, and my daughter found me through DNA. So, it's one of my favorite topics. And so we're here with Greg, who's one of our WikiTreeers. You've seen him other places today, and Kathy. They're both going to share their stories. Mags just magically popped in right when I was going to introduce her. And she and Rob Worthen from Mido DNA, right? And DNA, are you still doing DNA GEDCOM?
You're muted, Rob.
You're muted.
Yes.
Yes, I am.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I went and showed my.
Oh.
I have it down low, so it's not visible most of the time.
So Greg and Kathy are going to share their stories. I might share mine, and then Mags and Rob are here to help answer any DNA and adoption-related questions you might have. So throw those in the chat, and we'll try to get to whatever we can. And we're going to start with Greg.
Okay. So my story turned out actually pretty well. I grew up on a farm, and I always knew that I was adopted. I was adopted just before I turned 2 years old, so I have no memory of life before that. But I think I went to a foster home fairly early on, shortly after I was born, and then my parents, my mom and dad, adopted me, and I grew up in a farming community about an hour and a half north of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I was very happy. I always knew that I was adopted, and this, it was always made clear to me that I was chosen to be part of this family, along with my younger brother and younger sister, who are also adopted from different families. We're not biologically brother and sister, but I had lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, lots of cousins, all from the same, Irish, Scottish, Catholic farming community. So I never felt the need to go out and find my own biological family because I was quite happy with the one that I had. But I did lose both of my parents when I was in my 20s. My mom passed away just before we got married, and then my father, my dad, five years after that. But it wasn't till sort of fast forward till about 5 years ago, I was at a cousin's wedding, and one of my cousins had this had done an ancestry DNA test and was showing me this app. We were at another cousin's wedding, and she was showing me this, and it showed the breakdown of heritage. And so that got me interested. Well, I wonder if my biological makeup is the same as my adoptive family makeup, which I sort of identify with, which would be Scottish and Irish and English and maybe a little bit of French. So I did the ancestry DNA test, and I guess I was naive at the time, thinking that's the main thing I was going to get out of it. She had shown that there was cousins that showed up on her app that she hadn't known before, but I guess I hadn't put all the pieces together until I got the results. And so the first thing I looked at, of course, was the mix, the ethnic mix, which everyone does. And it is those main four components, though it was like half French Canadian, which was a shocker that it was that much. And then the rest of the names. And then I looked in the DNA matches list, and of course, didn't know any of the names. But the one thing I did know about my birth was I did know that my original birth name was Kelly John Douglas. And one of the cousins there, that was a first or second cousin, had the last name of Douglas. So I thought, oh my gosh, like this could be it. So anyways, I sort of stared and didn't do anything because I was sort of shocked and I didn't know what to do next. Do I dare make contact or whatever? But within 2 days of getting the results, and so I guess obviously the results percolating to everyone else, the other one, who was a first cousin match, contacted me and asked if I was interested in finding out how we're related, because according to Ancestry, we were first cousins. So I replied back to her that, well, I'm adopted, so I don't know who my parents are. And I did have the presence of mind to realize that this could be a sticky issue. And I said, well, and if this opens up, skeletons in the closet, and if this makes it uncomfortable, then we don't have to go any further, but I am curious if you're interested. And then she replied back, well, I'm adopted as well, so I guess that's not going to help. So that was wild, but that gave me the confidence to reach out to the next person on the list, the one with the last name of Douglas, and send her a message. And again, I started with, according to the ancestry DNA, we're close cousins, and but I'm adopted, and so if this opens up, a can of worms, then we can just walk on by, and I don't want to cause any problems with the family and whatnot. And like within 5 minutes, I got a ping in the inbox, and she says, welcome to the family. There's no such thing as a bad cousin. Come on and let me and let's figure out how we can solve this mystery and figure out where you fit. And so she was asking, when I was born and where I was born. She was kind of funny because she says, I want to rule my dad out of being the dirty dog. So, which is kind of so then
everybody should have angel cousins like that.
What's that?
Everyone should have an angel cousin like that.
Oh, she was amazing, so helpful. And so she had some possibilities, some cousins that could have been related, or some uncles that it could have been, but we sort of needed some more information. Now, in Ontario, you can write away for your original birth certificate and adoption record. So I did right away, and then that arrived in the first week of January. So I got my results in November. It took a while, of course, for the ministry, and Christmas was there, so that distracted me. And then it arrives in January, and so I get this letter in the mail, and I open it up, and there's my original birth record with my name, Kelly John Douglas, but it had not only my mother's name, but it had my father's name too. So I expected one or the other, probably just the mother's, but it had both. And the father's name ended with Douglas. It was Dwight Douglas. So I contacted my wonderful ancestry cousin, and she was so excited. She says, I know exactly who that is, and that's her first cousin. So we're actually first cousin once removed. And she says, and I know that he has 3 kids, and I can contact them if you want. And I said, well, sure. So she phoned them, and turns out they always knew that I existed. And 2 of them are my full brother and sister, because my parents were teenagers, like really young. My mother had just turned 16 before I was born. So was sent away to the, school, or to give birth, and then give me up for adoption right away. But they stayed sweethearts and then got married and had two children. And then I have a half sister with my father from later on. But they always knew that I existed and just wondered, where I was. So I was welcomed into the family. And so that February, so a month later, after we first made contact on Family Day, which is actually a holiday here in Ontario, we got to meet them face to face. And they met my kids. They were guests at my daughter's wedding. And so we're now one big family. My biological siblings and my adoptive siblings are all we all get along well. So it's really a good news story.
Wow.
It worked out well for me, but I was conscious from the very beginning that when I was reaching out that I had to be cautious, because I know it doesn't always work out this well. And I was just lucky that it did.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a great story.
I love it. Really good. Kathy, how about you?
Me, I was born in Rochester, New York. And when I was 2.5, my dad got his company. We're building a location in Palo Alto, California. And so we ended up moving across the country out here. And like Greg, I always knew I was adopted growing up. And my parents said if they could help me find out who my birth parents were, they would. They had family friends that had adopted from the same location that had tried to get information and couldn't really. So that didn't help much. And then my dad passed away in 2002. And I had always thought about finding my birth parents. They knew about it. They were very supportive. If they were not supportive, I probably would have waited until my mom passed. I mean, she's still alive. She's very, supportive of everything. And so I took the mitochondrial DNA test at first thinking, oh, I'll find my birth mother. Then started doing some research. That ain't gonna help you. That's good on long, far away, but not local. So then I did the family finder with the family tree DNA, and I got some matches. Then I went over, and I didn't know at the time, but I started researching and stuff, and I took the test with Ancestry and got a lot of matches. But while I was waiting for my results and so forth, I had gone online on Facebook and joined some of the groups on there. And one big thing, well, two big things that they always recommend is do your research on your matches first. Try to know as much information about them before you contact them. But at the same time, you as the adoptee want to be the first one that makes contact, because it could be your only chance, your one and only chance to make that contact. And I actually had my closest match, who turns out to be my birth mother's first cousin. She had kind of sent me a message like, who are you, kind of figuring these things out. And then she started asking some questions, and I kind of answered, but I was careful. Hang on just a second.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for my dogs to come and bark and stuff. So
I know mine's probably just.
No, I have the dog. I have the dogs in here. My granddaughter and her mom are up and about. So she kind of was going a little bit back and forth and stuff. And then all of a sudden I get the last email she goes is, I know who your birth mother is. She's my first cousin. So that was exciting. And I kind of was jumping up and down, and I'm running, finding my kids and say, does this say what I think it says? Does this say what I think it says? And they were like, yes. And so we ended up connecting, and we talked for a long time. And had conversations. And then in 2019, I went to Rochester and spent a couple of weeks there getting to meet my birth mother and her family, a couple of her siblings and some of my cousins. And then we came back to California. We went down to Southern California where my mom and my brothers live. And so she met them, and that worked out really well. So that was, I just didn't know how it was going to go with my birth mother meeting my adopted mother. Then we came back here to my house, and she spent some time here getting to know me, my husband, and my kids. And she went back. Unfortunately, it's been rocky ever since. I do try and stay in touch with people on Facebook. I wish I was one of those people like you, Greg, that, you stay in touch. The family they don't care. It's not the out of sight, out of mind type mentality. And then growing up, I had a love for Italian food. Had no idea why. No idea. Till I started researching my paternal biological lines. My paternal grandmother was Italian. So now I know where my love of Italian food comes from.
Oh, yeah.
I love Italian food, but I have no Italian anywhere.
It's in the genes for me, which I'm really happy. So I did find those. Unfortunately, my birth father is no longer alive. And I did find an aunt, so his younger sister. And I had to make a tough decision. Was I going to be the one to make contact, or was I going to go against the advice of what people were saying and have somebody else make the contact for me? And that is just due to the circumstances surrounding my birth father.
Sure.
And I had done all the research and everything, and I had been talking to a very nice lady on Facebook, and we, became friends. And so she knew what was going on and stuff. And she said, if you'd like, I can make the contact for you. But what we did was she took all the research that I had and like the DNA matches I had on that, because I actually matched one of her daughters as a DNA match as a first cousin over on 23andMe. And so she put everything together in a report like you would for a client and sent it to me. And I went ahead and said, yes, that's it. So she went and she made the first contact. And I was really nervous the whole time. I really was. Is she going to contact me? What's going to happen? And I remember I was in a different location out running errands. And I remember the exact spot I was at, which I actually passed yesterday, when I received the phone call from my aunt for the very first time. And just having that conversation, it explained some of the stuff. Because for me growing up, I think the biggest part was not necessarily knowing my biological family members and having a relationship with them. It was more the medical issues. And that became even a stronger factor when I got married and started having kids, and then, worrying about, am I going to pass something on? What about all these cancers and everything? And then when my dad had got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I knew it wasn't biological, but it kind of scared me a little bit. And then in 2013, I got sepsis and nearly died. And that really scared me. And it woke me up and said, what am I going to leave for my kids?
Yeah.
And that was my decision, that as soon as I had the money to see about doing DNA, I said, I'm going to start researching these DNA kits and see, is it good? Will it help me? So I slowly started doing research. And then in 2016 or 2017 is when I first took the mitochondrial, and then the family finder after that, and Ancestry in 2018. I'm very thankful that I know where I came from. And I'm very appreciative of the family that I grew up. And for me, it was, my mom had 2 boys and she really wanted a girl.
Yeah.
And she talked to the social worker, and the social workers, back in those days, it's you get what you get. But the social worker said she would do her best to see if they could get a girl. And along I came.
There
And
you were.
my mom got me, and it's been a whirlwind. I mean, with the advances in DNA and finding everything. Eowyn, who's hosting,
Yeah.
and
So ultimately, though, you're glad that you did.
I am. I mean, originally I did it for ethnicity, and then I started finding out you can find, biological family members on there. So that was a
like
big,
Greg.
that was a big thing for me. And I don't stay in touch very much with the people on my paternal side either, but I do have quite a few family members on Facebook, and we kind of stay in touch.
You still have a connection.
That way, we still have a connection. That will always be there.
Yeah.
But at times I do admit, when I'm on Facebook and seeing some of these stories and hearing them, like Greg, how, they're getting together, with their half siblings and stuff, I do get a little jealous. Because
but you have so many people. That's what you hear. And there's so many people who actually have the opposite result.
Right.
And so, you're actually not as atypical as you would seem looking at Facebook.
Right.
And the adoption shows on TV
Yes.
are far-fetched.
Yeah.
That does not happen every time.
And they're also the ones that show you the ones that are good. If they wasn't good, they're not going to put it on TV.
Right. And I think that in a way, when they're not showing the ones that aren't good, I really truly believe in my heart that that's a disservice to the people that are doing the DNA.
Yeah.
And wanting to have all these happy endings. And I've, always been very vocal about being adopted, with my kids and everything. They know everything that, goes on. I keep them in the loop because I'm not going to hide something like that I know. And my heart breaks for these people that when they do the DNA test, they're finding out that they are adopted, or their father is not, their biological father. Or people are finding out secrets. They're finding a secret child, and what do? And family relationships have disintegrated because of that.
And that's also why it's really important for an adoptee to be ready for those eventual possibilities. And I know my wife went through that, and she was very slow. And there are times where it's like she pulled back, and you have to listen to the adoptee very much.
Yes.
I'm not an adoptee, but I've worked with a lot. And so I've learned to listen to what they're saying, and whether they're really ready to possibly have that heartache or have that excitement, because either way, it's life-changing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, and there's such a range of possible reactions that you really do have to be ready for any of those to happen.
Yeah. I can tell you, when I got the letter that, with the birth certificate there, like, that's when stuff got real. And I just, like, I didn't open it for an hour because I wasn't quite sure. I was in the middle of something. It was, I think, the mail goes at 11 or something. And I was in the middle of work, and I knew I couldn't open it until at least it was lunchtime, and my heart was pounding, and because I had no idea where this was going to lead.
You were teaching, right?
No, I was actually working online from home, developing online activities. So
okay, good. Because I can imagine getting a letter like that, opening it at lunch, and then going back to the classroom.
Oh no, that would be bad.
So mine was, I'll just share real quick, but I
have to leave for a sec.
Okay, we'll see when you come back.
See you in a bit. Yeah.
So I mentioned I'm adopted, but I'm also a birth mother. And in 2004, I was working at a bookstore, and we had 2 books about adoption that we sold. And they were very technical, and it annoyed me a lot because adoption is anything but a technical process. There's emotions from everybody that's involved in it. And so I'm not an author. I don't know why, but one day I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to write a book about adoption. It just needs to be done, which I haven't done, by the way. So don't go looking for that on Amazon. But so one day, I I'd always kind of been mildly curious, but I kind of like Greg, like I didn't really have I hadn't had a motivating reason to go and look. But I was on this adoption website looking at stuff for this book I was going to write. And back when we still had pop-ups before you could block them, there was this pop-up and it said, click here to see if anybody's looking for you. And I was like, I kind of rolled my eyes and was like, yeah, like anybody's looking on this website. But for whatever reason, I guess maybe I had like a subconscious need to know, I put in what I knew about my birth and it immediately matched me with my birth mother. And so I hadn't even really been trying necessarily. And then all of a sudden, there she was. And it had her name and it had my birth father's name. So both kind of, there. And it took me a little while to track her down, but I found her through her uncle or through her brother and was able to call her. And it was so sad because her very first question was, do you hate me? Which just broke my heart because I never had any ill will towards her. I always knew I was adopted. It was just, that's how I got to where I got to. Like, I wasn't upset about it, but I was happy.
That was actually sweet that she felt for you versus thinking for herself.
Yeah. And, anybody, adoption is a fairly selfless thing generally. And so that just was another example of kind of her, she was more worried about me than her. But my birth father, he's actually on New Mexico's most wanted list. So I haven't really gone out of my way to find him. But as a genealogist, through her, I was able to learn more about that side of the family and build out that tree. My biological father's side was a mystery for a long time, which drove me crazy because half of my tree was blank and I didn't like that. But through DNA testing, I found an aunt who was able to give little snippets of history. And the one I kind of wanted to mention was I've had a first cousin on 23andMe, and he was the closest thing I could find that might connect me to my birth father at the time. And so I sent him a message. And I know everybody's like, nobody ever answers on these things. It was a year before he answered me. Like, he finally did. And he introduced me to my birth father's half-sister, who was my birth grandfather had 4 different families that didn't know about each other. She was from the first one. I come from the third one. So she was able to, kind of introduce my grandfather and great-grandfather. But I just wanted to say, I know it's frustrating when you're searching and nobody's answering your messages, but there's always that hope that they will. And in my case, it took a year. So you never know where an answer might come from, or if you get a pop-up that says it's someone related to you, fill it out because maybe they registered on that site, 4 years before you were on it.
And this is an excellent time to remind you all to go out to your different DNA kits and check for messages because you don't always get those.
Yeah.
And I found them like 6 months later and it's like, oh, shoot. Oh, and I could have answered it right then and there and had all the answers for them, but I didn't.
Yep. Okay. I think there was one question here. Which medium is the best route to contact the mother? Is Facebook okay?
I'll just say from working with DNA adoption, working with a lot of search angels, that phone call is really the best thing because you at least hear their voice. You'll get the opportunity to at least speak with them. First, though, you need to make sure you have some information about them. For example, my wife, when she first talked to her biological father, she knew the name that most of her family called him. So when she called, she actually had she knew the name, and his wife actually answered, and she was nervous and said, "Well, can I speak to him?" And I won't say the name, but she heard him in the background saying, "I don't know who it is, but they said such and such," and so it's like it must be family. So that's how she was able to actually get to speak with him initially. Mine is a funny opposite of that because when she registered on that site, she put her full name. So when I called her brother, I asked by the first name, which she hadn't gone by since she was a kid. And so he, for him, it kind of triggered him kind of in the same way, like, well, this is somebody who knows that name. Like, who could this be? So, and then they had a second question. We don't. Well, I just add on to that. Sometimes if you don't get that, sometimes just a letter, because that actually worked with my wife. she did speak with her biological mother, and that didn't work out very well at first. And then she sent a letter explaining it's showing pictures of her adopted parents and saying, I'm not looking for anything, that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily reach straight out to Facebook because you don't necessarily know who's going to answer on that side. And it might be a little more off-putting, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and there are people who troll Facebook looking for people to send weird messages to. So sometimes Facebook is not the best.
Yeah. Her other question was, we don't think the father even knew that he had a child. I wonder if it's fair even to approach him. Thoughts on that?
So I'm the male here, but I took a DNA test, and I would very much want to know if I had somebody else out there. It's completely the fact that you're willing to approach that and ask that question whether it's fair shows that you're in the right mind, that it's okay to. It's from what I've seen, a lot of times people are like, I have a right to know you and talk to you and stuff like that. That's not the right way to come into it. It's like being respectful, like Greg spoke earlier, and being respectful and understanding. If they don't want to speak to you, then unfortunately that happens.
Yeah, and what if the child is the product of some horrific thing? I've worked with a family recently, and it was so hard to identify who the other half of the family was, because it was all the same surname. Every single match they had all went back to the same surname, because it was an incredibly endogamous, incestuous situation. So there wasn't a second surname to find. It was all the same surname. So that's the other thing that has to give you pause is this a situation you want to share with the adoptee? Once you find it, I had a hard time with this particular adoptee because they didn't want to accept what the data and the information showed. It was very hard. Yeah.
And sometimes you have to then step back. I know a lot of us who've helped adoptees, you're excited because here you found this thing, but that information may not be what they want to hear or see or anything like that. So that can be hard. And you can't fire hose that information down to that person. You need to respect the level.
It took a good 2 or 3 years to be able to actually find the family. They were from a small village in Ireland, and it was very hard to find the family. It was very hard to drill down into that specific family and figure out what had happened, what actually had happened and how this came about. And it wasn't a good thing.
And I had a perfect example with the firewall thing. I had somebody contact me, and before they were able to respond, I'd looked into their information. I looked at the trees. I looked who they matched, and I was sending them information as I was figuring it out. And by the way, I work with DNA adoption, and I'm more than happy to help. And I was sending them all this information every 5, 10, 15 minutes. And I had it all figured out, knew exactly who it was. Didn't hear a word from them for a week. Because I freaked them out. It's like, you got to be respectful and ask, okay, do you want to know? Because some of these people, like you said, may be just interested in their ethnicity. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. And it's like Greg was saying, it's, suddenly he had the birth certificate and it was real. And it takes a minute. And I wasn't even looking, and suddenly I had my birth parents' names, and my jaw was on the floor because here it is, it's not a mystery anymore. There's no wondering, bam, and it just takes time to process, and everybody processes differently. So
yeah, and there are horror stories too when you're working with adoptees, like the adoptee that I'm talking about with the horrible incestuous family. They won't pay their bill for the work that I did for 3 years, because not that they disagree with it, it's that they don't want to accept it.
Yeah.
But beyond that, working with adoptees, you also have to be careful giving out piecemeal information, because if you give out too much information to an adoptee, they might fly off the handle, not knowing how to deal with the information they're getting, and go knocking door to door in the neighborhood trying to say, are you my daddy? Are you my daddy? So it's hard when you get that kind of information, how to process it and how to act on it correctly.
And I have the same thing with one of my uncles. So we talk about dirty dogs. I don't particularly like that term, but some men have been around, and my uncle's one of them. And this is the third child that we found of his that he didn't know about, and I had two uncles that it could have been, and I had the adoptee who I was speaking to was insistent that it had to be the other uncle who was still alive, and I could prove that it wasn't, but they were like knocking. It's like, no, you're keeping him from me. It's like, no, I can tell you for sure. So just believing that kind of stuff, yeah.
I think it's just important. Whatever side of it you're on is, you just have to remember to be thoughtful and respectful, and take into the consideration of everyone involved, and not push. Like, everybody needs their own time and space to be able to process. And just because someone doesn't want to talk to you immediately doesn't mean they're not going to want to talk to you at some point.
I have a question that is often asked of me is, who has the legal right? Is it the adoptee? Do they have a right to know their family? Or if it's a parent, and there's a comment about that in there, does the parent have the right not to know the adoptee? You know, whose rights are we talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that.
I don't know if there's a legal answer to that.
No.
Yeah. I personally feel like it's not right per se, but for the adoptee to be the one who's able to approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the adoptee has every right to know the information.
Yeah.
But they don't have a right to a relationship with that person, unfortunately.
No.
That's the one thing. And I found some adoptees who get so upset, and that's the one thing that you have to be ready before you make that first step, is be ready to have that rejection. And unfortunately, that's rejections again, as I understand it. Some people feel like they've been rejected the first time, and then being rejected the second time. My wife actually went through that with her biological mother.
Yeah.
It's really hard to watch.
For me, I have a right. I feel like I have the right to know all the public information that's available. Do I have a right to have a relationship with my biological family members? No. If they want to have one with me, I'm more than open to it, but it's not a right. I don't consider it a right, and I'm not going to demand it like I see some of these people demanding they have the right to that. No. Public information is out there. Research it, find what you can, and go with it. And I was born in like I said, in New York, which was a closed state for a long time. They just opened up to the adoptees being able to get their birth certificates, and when they finally opened it up, I was one of the first people that did request it. So I do have the genealogy copy, I guess you would say it, of my original birth certificate, but to me that's just kind of a piece of paper. My true birth certificate is the one that has my adoptive parents on it, that are the ones that raised me. WikiTree, we say one profile per person, yet adoptees are allowed to have two. I have the little template on both my profiles, because I do have two, because I have the one that has my DNA attached to it for the biological. I may look at that one once in a while, but I work mainly from my adopted profile, because that's who my family is to me.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When I go look at my family tree, it's my adopted family tree. That's the family I've known for 40-ish, maybe years. And it's, but I do love that about WikiTree too, because I have the same thing. I have my biological profile, which connects my DNA, and then I have mine, which is me, and the family that I relate to as family.
Yeah. And that's funny. So I've done the exact opposite. In fact, it's because of finding my biological family that I came to WikiTree, because I had done the family tree and I had all of my adoptive family on Ancestry, because I've always been interested in this topic, and coming to this, growing up in this family with lots of aunts and uncles and cousins, I was the one who collected all the names and put it all together, and had an Ancestry account so I could make the tree. Just didn't do any of the DNA stuff because that wasn't of interest at the time and wasn't even available when I first started, I guess. But when all of a sudden I had this new biological family, and they were pretty big too, I wanted to start fresh. I didn't want to put it on this one, and so I was looking for a new platform somewhere else and I found WikiTree, and it's been wonderful ever since then.
Well, we're glad you
so
found
my primary one, my primary tree, my profile is connected to my biological one because that's where I started, and then connecting back to AJ's and Eowyn's session from last hour, talking about a puzzle. Once, going back all of my French Canadian roots, and then when I made that first connection to the ancestor who was already on WikiTree, and then boom, all of a sudden, wow, what a thrill that was. I thought, oh man, my family goes back to the 1600s, sometimes 1500s in France. Wow. So, yeah. But one of my recent apps that I created, the 6 Degrees app, bridges that gap for adoptees, and eventually the fan chart app will do that as well. So that's kind of that's my answer to bringing those two worlds together.
And you can get to that app on WikiTree.
And you can get to that app.
The whole giving back that we talked about in the last panel was that we all do this work, but we all give back to the community too.
So for people who might be watching that are maybe taking the first steps towards DNA and adoption and trying to solve that, do you guys have just a few tips that you might offer to them?
I would say...
Hold a minute, but first you mentioned DNA and adoption. So, as a DNA can't prove anything.
Right.
It can't show anything. Now, obviously, if you get a first cousin but you often knowing more information about your background will be just as helpful. I actually found my wife's birth family through just fourth cousins. That was it. Mm-hmm. And then building family trees and stuff. Go out and get your non-identifying information. That is the first thing you have to do. Meanwhile, you can then go take your DNA test, and Max will give some other information. But I just want to make sure it was important. Don't just rely on DNA. Get your non-identifying information, any piece of information. And even if you've asked before, ask again, because you may get a different set of information. Ask every couple years.
I heard Cece Moore do a talk 5 years ago, where she said that the DNA testing pools, and when you talk DNA testing pools, you're talking about the pool of people at each one of the DNA testing companies, because you're going to match different people at the different companies because different people have tested at the different companies. Yeah. But Cece said that you could literally throw out somebody's DNA and find somebody's family, that we've come to critical mass in that ability is there. And so for a first step for somebody who's doing DNA to try and identify their family, my suggestion is, and thank you to Rob and I hadn't done it, test it at ancestry.com first, or ancestry.ca or ancestry.uk, wherever you are. Test there first. They have the largest, I think 18 to 20 million people in their database currently. Then you can take that data from them, download it, and upload it to a third-party site like GEDmatch. You can also upload your data to WikiTree. WikiTree is not a database per se, but WikiTree does take that information about who you're related to and automatically enters that information on all of your ancestors' profiles. So instead of looking at a big data set of DNA testers, you're looking at a big data set of ancestors who have DNA testers with paper trails back to them. So test with the biggest data pool you can, then download that data and spread it out elsewhere. You can't upload to 23andMe. So if you want to do a test at 23andMe, you'll need to test there. But otherwise, you can download from 23andMe and Ancestry and upload it to the other companies. And
So the first place you tested Ancestry, like Mag said, upload to MyHeritage, GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA. Those three are the ones that you can upload. Remember, for those who are interested in law enforcement, GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA do work with law enforcement, so make sure you choose which way you wish to work with that. And then even Living DNA. And then, as Mag said, by the time you've uploaded to all those, you can then decide, do you wish to test at 23andMe? Finally, if you're male, us males get lucky, don't forget the Y DNA at Family Tree DNA. That can often give you a potential surname for your biological father.
And then you can download that Y-DNA and upload it to the third-party site, mitoydna.org, or you can add that information for that test to WikiTree, and WikiTree integrates. You can click from a WikiTree profile for an ancestor, click on a Y-DNA tester, and it will take you to the information on mitoydna.org.
So just for numbers, I'm looking at thednageek.com, and there's a link for DNA tests. Leah Larkin tracks these. About 20 million as of last year for Ancestry, about 12 million for 23andMe, about 5 million for MyHeritage, and then the rest are about 1 million or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
And
again, Ancestry is certainly the first place to look.
By far.
yeah, MyHeritage is free to upload your DNA results to from Ancestry and 23andMe, but there is a small fee to pay if you want to use the tools on it, but it's not that much. You're not paying, for a DNA test, and it definitely is worth paying that few, well, $20
just a
or
one-time
whatever
fee,
it is.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, whatever it is now, around $20 or so to use the tools, because they are very helpful.
So I found MyHeritage does have a lot of different types of people. The 23andMe, Ancestry, and MyHeritage have a lot of different matches and stuff like that. And obviously, GEDmatch is the first one to upload to.
Right.
Yeah, you're looking at different pools, and even if you're uploading to GEDmatch, don't forget not everybody uploads to all these other places. So uploading to MyHeritage will get you a pool that you won't see in GEDmatch.
Right.
Right.
Not total.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was also going to mention, just from my own personal experience, the Ancestry seems to be where I get the most responses to messages, and also where more people have their tree that you can look at too. So
having that tree is very important.
So one of the big things is ultimately, when you are working with your DNA, what you're trying to do is you're trying to do what we call pedigree triangulation. You're trying to look at all your matches and see how they match each other. And so you're finding who is your ultimate common ancestor. But remember, you're looking at DNA Painter oftentimes to see, okay, how far back are they? Remember, that's just an estimate. It could go back further. So, for example, in my instance, I thought I had a third cousin once removed, so I went back 3/4 cousins. They end up being fifth cousins, and so I had to go back a little bit further. And so, don't forget to go back 1 or 2 generations further, and then work your way forward.
And Janine, that was not. I don't know if he was answering your question specifically, but that is the answer to your question. Is you may have to go back another generation and then work the tree down from that generation further back, since you don't have any testers in the generation you're looking at. So you may find a brother in one of that family to find that other Y tester that you're looking for.
Gwen asked, she said, I found that MyHeritage is better for Eastern European, Italian, Croatian, etc., as testing is more in Europe. Is that still the case?
Yeah.
That's what I found.
Yeah, and Living DNA, the company in Britain, that is another really good company for European results, and they've really worked out towards the Middle East and Africa and out in. So yeah, Living DNA is also another good one.
Cool. Well, Mags is talking tomorrow at 10 Eastern, right?
Yes.
Yes, 10 Eastern, about how you can incorporate your DNA into WikiTree. So if that's something you heard about today and you want to know more, she's your girl tomorrow. So we'll be talking about that. Any last advices or tips or comments? Questions?
I do want to mention DNA Adoption DNAadoption.org is a good site that provides training for those who want to learn more about doing DNA and adoption. And it doesn't have to just be adoptees; it could be anybody. And I did want to mention DNA GEDCOM since I'm here as somebody who has worked specifically for tools and stuff for the DNA.
I want to interrupt Rob really quick, because we
that?
wouldn't have a tool like DNA GEDCOM if he hadn't figured this out. He was like one of the very first people to figure out that we needed to have some computerization and some tools to be able to work this stuff. So Rob Huzzah and his DNA GEDCOM was born out of his search for his wife's family.
Nice.
And I want to mention Greg also. So I know Greg and I both are always interested in ideas for how you might want to do things that you think could be automated and stuff like that. And we were always looking for different things. I know Greg works heavily in WikiTree, and that's an area that I think is going to, having a one tree makes it so much easier to take matches and try and put them together. So the more people who can get their tree into WikiTree, and then we can then know that match is this WikiTree, and then we can figure out very quickly how the two people match. That's wonderful. That not just for adoptees, but that's helpful for everybody.
Yeah, just in general.
Yeah.
Tomorrow morning I'll cover that.
If you're not a member of WikiTree, go to wikitree.com. It's 100% free.
It's 100% free.
100,
and it's
not
a real
99%. It's 100% free.
It's 100% free, and it's a real person that greets you when you join. It's not a robot.
Great.
So
That's true.
it's really there. Yeah, it's actually thanks to Greg and Chris Ferriello being guests on Family History Fanatics that got me back on WikiTree, and I've been here ever since. And finding out about as an adoptee, having the two profiles is awesome. And I'm just so involved now, and everything is free, and the collaboration is wonderful. And we have things like this where you can chat with other people and get their suggestions or advice about something.
For sure.
Chris Ferriello says you're welcome.
Yes. He always does.
He does.
So I'm going to thank Greg and Kathy for sharing their stories. I know that's not always easy, so we appreciate it. And Mags and Rob for being here to offer their helpful advice and tips. And we just like to end with spotlighting one of our exhibitors. And since we've been talking about DNA, how could I do anything other than MitoYDNA? So MitoYDNA is a website for uploading Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA to create a Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA database. The site also offers DNA matching, analysis, and tools to help our users and volunteers further their genealogical research. And you can go visit their booth and that space page, check them out, upload your stuff. And with that, we're out of here. As soon as
Enjoy
I
the
find
rest of the symposium.
Bye. See you for another one.
Bye. Thank you.